Hello everyone, welcome to another video by Foodemy. In today's video, we'll be discussing the GATE 2023 question paper Food Technology section part 2. In case you still haven't watched the part 1 of this video, you can find the link attached in the description box. So now without any further delay, let's get started. So beginning with the first question, we have match the process in column 1 with the related food component in column 2. So what we basically have in column 1 is different peeling methods and we need to match it to column 2. So now let's understand all of these peeling methods one by one. Basically, peeling is a crucial pre-processing step in food processing industry and different peeling techniques can be used based on vegetable texture, skin thickness and processing scale. So looking at all these processes one by one, first we have knife peeling, which is basically manually or mechanically cutting the skin using blades or knives, and it is generally used for food products such as cucumber, apple, carrot. And then we have abrasion peeling. Now as the name suggests, we use abrasive force. So basically abrasive rollers or brushes are used to rub off the outer skin. Generally it is used for the root vegetables such as potato, beetroot, ginger. Then we have flame peeling, which is basically exposing the surface to an open flame to burn off the skin, as the name also suggests. And the examples are, for example, brinjal and pepper. So lastly, we have flash peeling, again as the name suggests, subjecting to high temperature for some time. So brief exposure is given to high temperature steam or hot air, which is followed by cooling to loosen the skin. And the examples are tomato and peach. So the correct answer to this question is option number D, since with knife peeling, cucumber will be the correct answer. With abrasion peeling, potato will be the correct answer. With flame peeling, brinjal, and with flash peeling, tomato. Therefore, option number D is the correct answer. Now, heading on to the second question, we have a numerical which says calculate the efficiency in percentage, which is rounded to 1 decimal place, of an oil expeller which yields 35 kg oil. But the oil contains 5% solid impurities from 100 kg mustard seeds, and the oil content of the mustard seed is 38%. So now here we are given that oil yield which is obtained from the expeller is 37 kg, but this oil also contains 5% impurities. And then the oil content, total oil content in the mustard seeds is 38%. So the total mustard seeds which are being input in the question is 100 kg. So the total oil content will be 38% of 100, which becomes 38 kg. Now let's understand how much oil is recovered. So we know that 37 oil is recovered, but we also know that since 5% is impurities, we should subtract 5% of 37% to get the correct amount. So we subtract 5% of 37 from 37% and we get 35.15 kg. So now the efficiency can be calculated by actual oil recovered by total oil available into 100, which becomes 35.15 divided by 38 into 100. Therefore, the correct answer comes out to be 92.5%. So now heading on to the next question, which is again a numerical. It says orange juice is packed aseptically and stored under ambient conditions. Now the degradation of vitamin C in the juice occurs during storage and it follows the first order reaction kinetics. The degradation rate constant is 5.2 into 10 to the power minus 3 per day, and we need to calculate the half-life in days in integer. So firstly we are given with the degradation rate constant value and then we need to find the half-life. We know that the formula for the same is 0.693 divided by the K. So putting on these value we get 133.26 and the answer in integer will become 133 days. Therefore the correct answer to this question is 133 days. Now heading on to the next question, it says which among the following statement is not correct. So we have 4 different statements. Now let us look at omega-3, beta-carotene, vitamin B12 and polyphenol oxidase one by one. Now omega-3 fatty acids are basically a group of essential polyunsaturated fatty acids, that is PUFA, which play a crucial role in brain function, heart health as well as reducing inflammation. Now the human body cannot produce them, therefore they must be obtained through food. And the examples contain alpha-linolenic acid, docosahexaenoic acid or eicosapentaenoic acid. And the main sources are fatty fishes, which include salmon, sardines, mackerel, cod liver oil, and among the vegetarian sources, flaxseed, chia seeds, walnut, hemp seeds, soybean oil are some examples. So next we have beta carotene. As we all know, beta carotene is basically a precursor of vitamin A retinol, means the body has the ability to convert this into vitamin A when needed. It has antioxidant properties and is basically a fat soluble component, and it is basically found in carrots, sweet potatoes, beetroot, pumpkin, spinach and papaya. These are all rich sources for beta carotene or retinol. Then we have vitamin B12, which is also called as cobalamin, and as we all know, it is a water soluble vitamin which is essential for various body functions including red blood cell formation, nerve function or DNA synthesis. And the sources mainly include animal proteins such as chicken, fish, egg, and mainly the dairy products which include milk, curd and paneer. Now about vitamin B12, it is basically found in only animal products or dairy products which are again coming from animals such as milk, curd and paneer, and it is not found in the vegetarian sources. So it can only be found in the products which are generally fortified. Let's say fortified cereals or fortified plant-based milks are coming these days fortified with B12, but otherwise it is only found in the animal products or dairy products. Therefore, the people who are vegetarian or vegan can sometimes also require supplements for vitamin B12. Then we have polyphenol oxidase, which is an enzyme responsible for browning reaction in fruits and vegetables. And as we all know, it causes oxidation of polyphenol to quinones, and it leads to enzymatic browning as we see in case of apples. Sugarcane also contains polyphenol oxidase, which reacts with oxygen, and as a result, the juice is susceptible to browning, which can affect its color, taste and shelf life. Therefore, the correct answer to this question, let's look at all the options one by one. So, codfish is a source of major omega-3 fatty acids. We have seen that this is a correct statement. Beetroot is a good source of beta carotene. We have seen that this is also a correct statement. Apple is a good source of B12. So, this is a wrong statement since we have seen the vegetarian sources such as apple do not contain vitamin B12. And then fresh sugarcane juice is a good source of polyphenol oxidase, which is again a correct option. And the question says which of the following statement is not correct. Therefore, the only statement which is not correct is option number C is the correct answer to this question. Now heading on to the fifth question, which says identify the correct statement with respect to the polysaccharides among the following. So we have statements about dextrin, amylose, amylopectin and retrogradation. So let us look at these one by one. Now polysaccharides are basically higher molecular weight substances which are composed of large number of monosaccharides which combine to form one large molecule or polymer. Now, polysaccharides are commonly found in foods such as starch, dextrin, glycogen, cellulose, hemicellulose, pentazones, pectic substances. Now, let us look at the first polysaccharide we will discuss is starch. Now, starch is basically the principal food reserve polysaccharide, and starch only contains glucose residues which are basically joined together. Now, there are two types. We can have amylose or amylopectin. Amylose is a linear component of the starch which basically consists of glucose units which are joined by alpha 1,4 bond. As you can see over here, we have fourth carbon and here we have first carbon which is joined to one another. Therefore, this is alpha 1,4 linkage. So, it is basically a linear chain. As we can see over here, there is no branching. So, it is the linear component which contains glucose units which are attached by alpha 1,4 bonds. Then amylopectin is basically the branch structure present in the starch, which basically consists of alpha 1,4 linkages which is forming the linear structure as we have seen in case of amylose. And apart from the alpha 1,4 linkage, it also has alpha 1,6 linkage as you can see over here. So this first carbon is attached to the sixth carbon of the other glucose, right? So it basically contains glucose which are joined by alpha 1,4 and alpha 1,6. So this is a branch structure. Now we look at dextrins. Dextrins are basically products of partial breakdown of starch, and dextrins are intermediate in size between starches and sugar, and they exhibit properties that are intermediate between them. So basically starch breaks down to form intermediate size parts, which are the dextrins are basically larger than sugar but smaller than starches, and they are formed when starch is subjected to dry heat. For instance, when toasting of bread is done, a part of starch will be converted to dextrin. When we are giving dry heat, then starch breaks down into small part known as dextrin. Now looking at the last one, retrogradation. So as we have just understood that starch contains amylose and amylopectin, it is basically the amylose which undergoes the swelling in the starch granule. So since amylose is the linear component, now what basically happens is the linear chains come together and water is trapped in between those chains. So let's say these are all water molecules. So this basically causes the starch granule to swell in size, and as a result, this is called gelatinization. Now, when this gelatinized starch is stored over time, what basically happens is the water trapped in between these amylose chains tends to tends to leach out. So because of gravity effect and all, let's say the water starts to leach out, and this is known as syneresis, and the amylose chains tend to realign with themselves. So initially the crystalline structure is broken and amorphous structure is formed, and later on when the gelatinized starch is kept for long, this structure basically starts to crystallize again. So retrogradation is the process in which gelatinized starch molecules, primarily amylose, amylopectin, they realign to form a more ordered structure upon cooling, leading to firmness and potential texture changes in the food. For example, in bread stilling, rice hardening after cooling, and thickening of the refrigerated sauces. So the correct answer to this question will be, now let's look at all these statements one by one. Dextrin is a group of low molecular weight polysaccharides produced by dry hydrolysis of starch. This is the correct statement. As we have just seen, when the dry heat treatment is given to starch, it breaks down into smaller components known as dextrin. Then it says amylose is a linear polymer of D-glucose units joined by alpha-1,6 glycosidic linkage. Now this is a wrong statement, as we have just seen that it is alpha-1,4 linkage. Next is amylopectin is a branch chain polymer of D-galactose monomer units. So this is also wrong, even though it is a branch structure, but it does not contain galactose monomer, rather glucose is the monomer. Next is retrogradation is a process of reassociation of amylose and formation of crystalline structure by gelatinized starch upon cooling. We have just seen that this is the correct statement. Therefore, the correct answer to this question will be option number A and D. Now heading on to the next question, which is a numerical. So a hammer mill is used to grind black gram. Now the size distribution of black gram is such that 80% passes through 6 mesh, which is 3.36 mm screen. Now what is happening is basically a hammer mill has ground the black gram to such an extent that 80% of it is passing through a sieve of size 3.36 mm. Now the power requirement to produce powder, 80% of which passes through 45 mesh size 0.354 mm is 4.5 kilowatt. Now the question says that 4.5 kilowatt of energy or power is being used to further grind it to such a small size that 80% of it passes through 0.354 mm size. Now the question asks the power in kilowatt required to produce a finer powder, 80% of which will pass through 60 mesh size will be dash. Now the question is asking that how much power will be required in kilowatt if we want to further grind it to such a level, to such a fine size that 80% of it passes through particle size of 0.25 mm. Now the question says that we need to assume that the feed rate is constant in both the cases and Bond's law has to be used for size reduction. Now let us look what is basically given. So first, feed particle size is given. The original particle size that we are given is 3.36, right? So we are beginning with 3.36 mm, and since the question says that the feed rate is constant in both the cases, so the feed rate 1 will be equal to feed rate 2. Next is we see the average size of the product particle which passes through 45 mesh, that is 0.354 mm, and for a known power. The power was also given for this case, which was 4.5 kilowatt. So with 4.5 kilowatt power and average particle size is 0.354, which passes through this mesh size. Next is average size of product particle passing through 60 mesh size is 0.25 mm for an unknown power, and we need to calculate this P2, right? So now seeing the Bond's law, we have this formula. Now since we have two values, two basically different particle sizes, so we put into ratio P1 is to P2, and as a result we divide this first values by the second one. So what will happen is the F1, since the F1 is equal to the F2, these F values get cancelled and we are left with this equation. Now if you look at this equation, again 2b will be cancelled by 2b. So we will be left with these. Now putting the values of this P1 is given as 4.5 and we need to calculate P2. And since F1 is equal to F2, right? So both the values are same here, 3.36, and here we have put the values of P1 and P2 respectively. Now solving on this question, we get P2 is equal to 4.5 into 1.281, which comes out to be as 5.77 kilowatt. Therefore, the correct answer to this question is 5.77 kilowatt. Now heading on to the next question, question number 7, which is again a numerical. It says the weight of 10 kg dried cauliflower containing 5% moisture after rehydration is 60 kg. So we have dried cauliflower which has a moisture content of 5%, and after rehydration it becomes 60 kg. If the fresh cauliflower contained 87% moisture, so the moisture content before the dehydration was 87%, calculate the coefficient of rehydration up to 2 decimal places. Now the coefficient of rehydration is basically given by this formula, where WR and WD basically represent weight of rehydrated sample and weight of dehydrated sample respectively, and MI and MF is the moisture content of the sample before dehydration and after dehydration respectively. So what we see here is we are already given with the weight of rehydrated sample, that is 60 kg, and the weight of dehydrated sample was also given over here, that is 10 kg, right? So we have 10 kg over here. Then the moisture content of the sample before dehydration, we are given that the fresh cauliflower had a moisture content of 87%, and we are given that after dehydration the moisture content becomes 5%. So putting these values into this equation, then we solve this equation, we get 0.82. We have to calculate till 2 decimal place, so the correct answer to this question becomes 0.82. Now heading on to the next question we have. If D10 for Salmonella in egg yolk is 0.75 kg, calculate the radiation dose in kg rounded off up to 2 decimal places required for reducing Salmonella count in egg yolk by 8 log cycle. So now again we are given with the D10 value, which is basically the decimal reduction time or the time or radiation dose which is required to reduce the microbial population by 1 log cycle or 90%, and we are given that we need to reduce the count by 8 log cycles, right? So now basically what we need to calculate is the F value, because F value is actually the thermal death time, which is defined as the total time or the radiation which is required to accomplish a stated reduction in the population of vegetative cells or spores, and we are given with the sterilization value, that is the number of log cycles, 8. So we can use this formula, F is equal to D into SV, where SV is the sterilization value and D is the thermal reduction time. So putting on these values, we get 6 kg as the answer. Therefore, the dose required for reducing the Salmonella count in the egg yolk by 8 log cycle is 6 kg. Now heading on to the next question, we have the average moisture binding energy of a plant protein based snack at 8% moisture content dry basis is given as 3200 calories per mole. Now if the water activity of the snack at the above moisture content is 0.30 at 30 degrees Celsius, the water activity of the sample at 45 degrees Celsius will be. And we need to round this off to 2 decimal places, and the value of gas constant is also given to us. So now basically what all things we are given with the moisture content dry basis is 8%. We are also given with the moisture binding energy, which comes out to be 3200, and we are given that at 8% moisture content at 30 degrees Celsius the water activity is 0.30. So 30 degrees Celsius in Kelvin comes out to be 303 Kelvin, and what we need to calculate is the water activity for the same 8% moisture content snack at 45 degree, which becomes the T2 318 Kelvin will be. We need to find out this water activity value. Now we can find this out using Arrhenius equation. So we will be using this equation, substituting all the values. Now here K1 becomes the water activity at the T1 that we know, which is 0.30, and we need to calculate K2, which is the water activity at the T2. So putting on all the values, we get this, and now once we solve this, basically K2 comes out to be 0.3854. Now since we need to round off up to 2 decimal places, it comes out to be 0.39. Therefore the correct answer to this question will be 0.39. Now heading on to question number 10, which is again a numerical. It says cow milk is pasteurized at a flow rate of 1 kg per second in a counter current heat exchanger using hot water as the heating media. The milk enters the heat exchanger at 15 degree and exits at 50, and the specific heat for the cow milk remains constant at the inlet and exit, and it is given as 3.5. Now it says that the inlet and the exit temperature of the hot water are 75 and 60 respectively. If the overall heat transfer coefficient is 1800, the heat transfer surface area in meter square is equal to. So now firstly, let us see what all things are given to us in this question. So firstly, we are given with the mass flow rate, that is 1 kg per second. Next, we are given the specific heat of milk, which remains constant from inlet to exit, which is 3.5. Now, since it is a counter current flow, the question says that it is a counter current flow, right? So we will calculate the inlet of the milk would be exit point of hot water and vice versa. Therefore, when we calculate the T1, which is the temperature difference from milk, we take this value 60 from here. Basically the inlet and the exit temperatures for hot water were 60, right? So the exit temperature for hot water is 60. Therefore for milk we take 60 minus 15. 15 is basically the entrance temperature of milk, right? So 60 minus 15, which comes out to be 45 degree. Similarly, the temperature difference for hot water will also be taken in this way, because this is a counter current system. So here 75 minus 50, this 75 comes from the inlet temperature of the hot water and 50 is basically the exit temperature of the milk. So the T2 again comes as 75 minus 50, which is 25 degrees Celsius. Now here we are also given with the overall heat transfer coefficient, which is 1800, and what we need to calculate is the heat transfer surface area in meter square. So now first, using log mean temperature difference for counter current flow, we have this formula. Now putting the values of T1 and T2 as we have just calculated, we get 34.02 degrees Celsius, right? Now for calculating the heat transfer area, next we will calculate the heat transfer area, because we want to calculate the area, and for the heat transfer area we also need the value of the heat transfer rate. So let us first calculate the value of Q using this formula. Now putting on all the values as already given to us in the question, which comes out to be 1 into 3500 into 35. Now here we see that delta T is 35, and delta T, here we had calculated delta T1 and delta T2 as 45 and 25, but here we are putting those not those values but rather 35, because here what delta T is basically the temperature change in the milk. So it is the basically the milk, what heat it is absorbing, so that basically comes out, the inlet and the outlet temperature of the milk is basically subtracted, so it comes out as 50 minus 1535. Whereas for the log mean temperature difference, we were using the temperature driving forces between both the fluids in a counter current exchanger, right? There in the for the log mean temperature difference, because it was a counter current system, this temperature driving force between those fluids was being taken as T1 and T2. But for the calculation over here, we will take the change of the milk as it absorbs the heat. We need to take that temperature difference. So therefore it comes out to be as this value. Now for calculating the heat transfer area, again putting the values in this formula. So here we have calculated the value of Q. U is given to us in the question, and we have calculated the log mean temperature difference as well. So now putting on these value, we get 2 meter square as the answer. Therefore the correct answer to this question is 2 meter square. Now heading on to the last question, we have match the process in column 1 with the related food component in the column 2. So here we have, in the column 1 we are given with the food processes caramelization, denaturation, oxidation and bleaching, and we need to see what it matches with. So let us look at basically all these processes one by one. So first is caramelization. As we know, caramelization is basically the browning of sugar, and it is extensively used in cooking because it results in butter-like flavor and brown color. The brown color are produced by the three group of polymers, which are caramellans, caramellins and caramellines. Now since this process occurs, volatile chemicals such as diacetyl, which is known for its butter-like flavor, and it is produced along with characteristic caramel flavor, and it is basically a non-enzymatic kind of browning. So the distinct aroma and the flavor of the caramelized food product result from volatile compounds, which includes furans, which is furfural, diacetyl, hydroxymethyl furfural, aldehydes and acid. So now let us look at denaturation. Denaturation basically refers to the structural alteration of the proteins. Now in the proteins it also includes enzymes, because enzymes are also basically proteins. So due to heat, pH changes or due to chemicals, so this process disturbs the hydrogen bond and hydrophobic interaction, causing the protein to lose its functional shape and rendering enzymes inactive. So firstly, the functional proteins show a quaternary structure, and when heat is applied, it alters the intermolecular bond of the protein. As you can see over here, the structure is basically destroyed and basically it opens up, right? So unfolding of the polypeptide chain occurs, as we can see over here, right? So unfolding has occurred, and it is basically enzyme denaturation affects the food processing by inactivating certain spoilage enzymes. That is also desirable sometimes when we are able to inactivate spoilage enzymes such as, let's say, polyphenol oxidase to prevent the browning, enzymatic browning, or peroxidase, lipooxygenase during blanching, pasteurization or heat treatments. This helps to prevent browning, off flavor or texture degradation in the food products. Next we have lipid oxidation, which is basically a process where unsaturated fatty acids react with oxygen, leading to rancidity and off flavors, and this reaction occurs in 3 stages as we know: initiation, where free radicals are formed; propagation, where free radicals react with oxygen; and termination, formation of non-radical products. Next is the bleaching agents. Now bleaching agents in the food basically allow lightening of the food color. Now they are used in different places in the food, in the different foods, let's say in dairy processed food, bakery, even oil manufacturing, to lighten the color of the oil. It works by breaking down the chromophores, which are basically the color causing molecules. So it breaks down the chromophores through oxidation using agents like hydrogen peroxide, ozone, chlorine, or reduction using sulfur dioxide or bisulfides. So examples of some bleaching agents include hydrogen peroxide, benzoyl peroxide, ozone, chlorine gas, chlorine dioxide, sodium hypochlorite, sodium metabisulfite, etc. So let us look at the correct answer to this question. So we have just seen that caramelization is basically sugars, right? Then denaturation goes with enzymes, then lipids generally oxidize, and then bleaching is done to remove the pigments, right? Therefore, the correct answer to this question becomes option number A. So with this, we end this video. Don't forget to like and share this video with your friends, and don't forget to follow our channel for many more upcoming videos from Foodemy. Thank you for watching.